I swear to God, that grave was breathing. And I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. But I need you to understand something before you write me off as some sleep-deprived fool with too much time alone in the dark. I have worked the night shift at Coldwater Creek Cemetery for 11 years. 11 years of Kentucky winters and August heat, lightning, and every sound a rural graveyard makes when the living aren't around to drown it out. I know what a mole sounds like burrowing under sod. I know what a possum sounds like dragging something it shouldn't have. I know the way a fresh mound settles when the soil is still loose, still adjusting, still learning the weight of what it holds. This was none of those things. Let me back up. My name is Dale Pruitt. I'm 43 years old. I live 12 minutes from the cemetery in a single wide on my brother's property, and I drive to work in the same 2009 Chevy Silverado I've had since it had under 100,000 miles on it. It's got close to 340 now. I mention the truck because it matters later. Everything I'm about to tell you, I need you to picture the geography of it, the realness of it. This isn't a ghost story somebody dressed up nice. This is what happened to me between the 14th and the 22nd of October, and I have not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since the night it ended. Coldwater Creek Cemetery sits at the end of a county road about 4 miles outside Harlan. If you've never been to that part of Kentucky, picture hills that crowd in close on every side, dark enough and old enough that the trees at the ridgeline look like the teeth of something that's been dead a very long time. The cemetery itself is about 3 acres, maybe a little over. Cast iron fence on 3 sides, a low limestone wall on the 4th where it backs up against the creek. We've got maybe 600 markers in there, ranging from Revolutionary War-era field stones worn so smooth you can barely make out names, all the way up to polished black granite with laser-etched portraits and QR codes that link to memorial websites. I have walked every inch of that ground so many times I could navigate it in absolute darkness, which some nights I have had to. My shift runs 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The job is quieter than people assume. Mostly I do perimeter checks, make sure the gate's locked, keep an eye out for vandals. We get teenagers sometimes, never anything serious, just kids who think it's edgy to drink in a graveyard. I do some light groundskeeping in the early morning hours, checking drainage, straightening any markers that have heaved with frost, noting anything that needs the day crew's attention. I've got a small maintenance shed near the east entrance with a space heater, a folding cot, a coffee maker that takes about 20 minutes to produce something worth drinking, and a two-way radio that connects me to county dispatch if something comes up that needs law enforcement. October 14th was a Tuesday. Temperature in the low 40s, with one of those wet Kentucky fogs that comes off the creek and just sits there, diffusing your flashlight beam into a pale orange smear about 6 feet in front of you. I remember it being quiet in that particular way autumn nights get quiet. Not the absence of sound, but a kind of heaviness to it, like the air itself was full of something waiting to be said. The burial earlier that day had been for a man named Thomas Garrett Cole, 58 years old. The family had chosen a plot in the newer section, the west quarter, which is the flattest part of the cemetery and the best drained. I'd seen the day crew fill it in before I came on shift. Fresh mound, maybe 8 inches of raised soil above grade, the temporary plastic markers still in place while the family waited on the engraved stone to come in from the monument company. I noted it on my walk through the way I note all recent interments, just a habitual awareness of what's new, what's changed. It was on my second perimeter loop, somewhere around 1 in the morning, that I first noticed it. I was walking the west quarter path, flashlight in my left hand, and I happened to sweep the beam across Cole's mound. And I stopped. I stood there for maybe 5 full seconds trying to understand what I was seeing. The mound looked different, not sunken, not disturbed, just slightly, rhythmically, almost imperceptibly different in shape from moment to moment. Like something under it was pushing up, then releasing. Pushing up, then releasing. My first thought was an animal. Something burrowing. A groundhog maybe, or a large mole. It happens. I've seen it. Animals don't respect the distinction between the living and the dead. I clicked off my flashlight and crouched down, watching in the dark, listening. And I heard it. A sound so low it was almost below sound. A sigh. An exhalation. Slow and long and wet, the way a sleeping person breathes. And then silence. And then, slowly, so slowly, the mound rose again. I told myself it was the soil settling. Gas pockets forming in fresh-turned earth, releasing, creating the illusion of movement. I have since looked this up. It is not a thing that happens. Not like this. Not rhythmically. Not with sound. But that night, that first night, I convinced myself. I wrote it in my log. Unusual settling, west quarter, coal plot. And I went back to the shed and I drank 3 cups of bad coffee, and I did not go back to that part of the cemetery until my morning sweep at 5:30. The mound was still. The fog had thinned. Everything looked ordinary in the gray pre-dawn light. I almost forgot about it entirely. Almost. The thing is, when you work nights alone for as long as I have, you develop a kind of catalog memory of spaces. You know every sight line, every shadow, every cluster of stones. Your brain builds a map and it runs comparisons every time you walk through, flagging anomalies the way a smoke detector flags smoke. Usually for nothing, but not always. On the 15th, I was doing my midnight loop and I stopped at Cole's plot again. I'm not sure I consciously decided to. I just found myself there, flashlight on the temporary marker, reading the laminated card in its plastic sleeve. Thomas Garrett Cole. September 3, 1966 to October 12, 2024. Beloved husband and father. I stood there for a moment, and then I walked on. On the 16th, I stopped again. This time I left my flashlight on the marker longer, the way you do when something is snagging at the back of your mind without your permission. And I read it again. Thomas Garrett Cole. September 3, 1966 to October 12, 2024. Beloved husband and father. Same. Of course same. On the 17th I stopped and I read it and the middle name was wrong. I stood there in the dark and fog and I read it 3 times. Thomas Allen Cole. Not Garrett. Allen. I was certain as I've ever been of anything, that the middle name on the card 2 nights before had been Garrett. I pulled out my logbook and checked my entry from the 14th. I had written Cole plot, nothing else. I had not written the full name. I told myself I'd misread it. It was dark. Was foggy. The laminated plastic had condensation on it. I told myself a lot of things that night. On the 18th, the name on the card read Thomas Warren Cole. On the 19th, I came to the plot and the mound was breathing again. This time I stayed. I made myself stay. I clicked off my flashlight and I stood in the dark about 4 feet from the raised earth and I watched it and I listened to it for almost 20 minutes. The rhythm was unmistakable. Slow, deep, regular. In and out. In and out. The way a person breathes when they're not quite conscious. When they're somewhere between sleep and something else. The soil itself seemed to flex. Not dramatically, you wouldn't have seen it from 20 feet away. But up close, crouched down the way I was, I could see the surface of the mound rise by perhaps an inch, then settle, then rise again. And the sound. The wet, dark, low sound of breath moving through packed earth. I went back to the shed. I sat on the cot with my hands between my knees for a long time. Then I picked up the 2-way radio and held it without keying the mic. What was I going to say to dispatch? What was any of it going to sound like said out loud to another person? I put the radio down. I did not sleep. On the 20th, my radio stopped behaving normally. It started around 2 in the morning. I was in the shed, hands around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring at nothing in particular, when the radio on the shelf began to emit a low static hiss. Not unusual, county dispatch has dead spots depending on weather, terrain, and what tower's pulling traffic. But this static had a texture to it that made the hair on my forearms stand up. It wasn't white noise. It had shape, rhythm. It rose and fell like breath. I reached over and turned the squelch knob. The static thinned. And in the thinning I heard, or I told myself I didn't hear because hearing it was not something I was prepared to do, I heard my name. Dale. Not a voice exactly. More like the sound of a voice remembered. Like the word was formed from the interference itself, shaped by something on the other side of the frequency that knew what a voice was supposed to sound like but couldn't quite manage it. I turned the radio off. I sat in the dark shed for 3 hours until the sky lightened enough that I felt like I could breathe again. Then I did my morning sweep at double time, keys jangling against my hip, not letting my flashlight rest on Cole's plot for more than 2 seconds. That afternoon I drove to the county records office and looked up the death certificate for Thomas Cole. The middle name listed was Garrett. Just like I thought. I drove home. I made a sandwich I didn't eat. I went to bed at 3 p.m. and I dreamed of being in a box. I need to tell you about the dream because it's important to what came later. In the dream I was conscious but I couldn't move. That specific, terrible stillness of a body that has stopped responding to commands. And it was dark. A darkness so complete it had texture, like velvet pressed against your eyes, and the space around me was small enough that when I finally managed to lift one hand, my knuckles scraped would not 4 inches above my face. And I could hear, from somewhere above me, a long way up through packed earth, the sound of footsteps. Regular. Methodical. Someone doing a slow loop, a perimeter walk, a habitual sweep of a space they knew by heart. And I opened my mouth in the dream and I screamed. And the scream went nowhere. It just filled the box and stayed there. I woke up at 7:15 in the evening with the sheets soaked through and my hands and forearms filmed with something dark. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked at my hands for a long time, The darkness on my arms was dirt. Fine, dark Kentucky cemetery dirt, packed under my fingernails, worked into the creases of my knuckles. My fingers ached as if I'd been clawing at something for a very long time. There was no dirt anywhere else in the room. Not on the sheets, not on the pillow. Just on my hands. I washed them 4 times. Then I got in the Silverado and I drove to the cemetery and I did something I had promised myself I would not do. I dug. Not deep. I want to be clear about this. I wasn't going to open the thing. I was going to dig down just enough to see the top of the vault, to reassure myself that the vault was sealed, that everything was as it should be, that there was a rational and geological explanation for what I'd been hearing and seeing, and that I could document it and bring it to the funeral home and they could explain it to me and I could go back to being a normal person who slept through the night and didn't hear his own name in radio static. I took a short-handled spade from the shed. The night was overcast, no moon, and colder than it had been, mid-30s, frost on the grass in the lower parts of the cemetery near the creek. I walked to the west quarter with my flashlight pointed down at the path. I did not want to see Cole's mound from a distance. I did not want to know in advance whether it was moving. When I got there, I planted the spade in the center of the mound and I began to remove soil. The top 18 inches came up easily, fresh-turned earth, not yet compacted. I piled it to the side, working quietly, working quickly. At about 2 feet down I hit the green burial vault cover. Standard sealed fiberglass. Intact, properly placed, no obvious disturbance from above. I breathed out a long breath. Okay. I was going to fill this back in, I was going to write a note to myself about gas release phenomena in freshly turned earth, and I was going to call my doctor in the morning about the sleepwalking, because that was clearly what the dirt on my hands had been about, and then I heard it. Right there. Right below where I was crouching, close enough that the sound came up through the vault cover and through the 2 feet of air between us and hit me directly in the face like a physical thing. Long, slow. Breathing. And then a sound I cannot replicate and cannot describe except to say it was the sound of fingernails, something that was once fingernails, moving slowly across the inside surface of wood. A long, unhurried stroke. Patient. Like something that was not in any hurry at all. Like something that knew it did not need to be. I filled the hole in as fast as I have ever done anything in my life. I did not tamp it down carefully. I did not try to restore the mound's original profile. I just shoveled the dirt back in and I ran back to the shed and I sat with the lights on and the space heater running and both hands wrapped around the radio until 6 a.m. and then I drove home and I did not go back for 2 nights. The cemetery's director called me on the second night I didn't come in. His name is Raymond Phipps, a thin, precise man who has run Coldwater Creek for 19 years and who believes in 2 things above all others: documentation and discretion. He asked me if I was ill. I told him I'd had a stomach bug. He told me he needed me back on the 22nd, that there was no one to cover and there was an early morning interment scheduled for 6:30 a.m. that he needed the grounds prepped for. I said I'd be there. The 22nd was a Wednesday. I pulled through the gate at 9:50 p.m., headlights cutting through a cold drizzle that was almost sleet, and I sat in the Silverado for 4 minutes before I made myself get out. The cemetery was exactly as I'd left it. Iron gate, limestone wall, 600 markers standing in rows in the dark in the wet, doing what markers do. I did not do a west quarter loop on my first check. I did the east quarter, the north section, the old part near the limestone wall where the 18th century stones list at angles like they're listening for something underground. I made coffee. I drank it. I told myself I was in control of this situation. At 1 in the morning the radio came on by itself. I had not touched it. The power switch was in the off position. The unit sat on its shelf in the corner of the shed and it produced, from its speaker, a wash of static that I felt in my back teeth. And then from the static, patient and unhurried and no longer ambiguous. Dale. Come back. Dale. The voice, if it was a voice, was low and wet and it had an intimate quality to it, the way someone sounds when they're talking very close to your ear in a dark room, right at the border between awake and not. It said my name 4 times and then the static cut off and the radio was silent and dark. I picked up the radio and keyed the mic. Dispatch, this is Pruitt at Coldwater Creek, you got a copy? Pause. Then, copy Pruitt. Quiet night. Everything okay out there? Fine, I said. Just checking in. I set the radio down. I took the spade from the corner of the shed. And I walked to the west quarter. I heard the collapse before I saw it. A sound like a held breath being released. Not a crack, not a cave-in, but a soft, deep, sudden exhale from the earth itself. The kind of sound that has no business coming from the ground. I was on the path about 30 yards out when I heard it and I stopped walking, and I stood there while my flashlight beam trembled slightly in my grip. Cole's mound was gone. Where it had been there was now a concavity, roughly 6 feet long by 2.5 feet wide, as if the earth had simply decided to accept what it contained. As if it had opened up and pulled something down. I walked to the edge of it and crouched and aimed my flashlight into the depression. I could see down into it. The vault had cracked, not from outside pressure but from below, the fracture pattern radiating outward from the center, and through the split in the fiberglass I could see the top of the coffin. The lid was open. Not ajar. Not shifted. Open the way you open a door when you're stepping through it into a room you want to be in. The coffin was empty. I stared at that for a long time. I want to be very precise about what I saw because precision is the only thing I have left of my credibility. The satin interior of the coffin was undisturbed. The pillow at the head end bore an indentation in the shape of a skull. The body of Thomas Garrett Cole, or Alan or Warren, whatever his name had been on whatever night you cared to read it, was not there. Whatever had been in that box was no longer in that box. I stood up. I took 3 steps back from the collapsed grave, and something moved between the markers to my left. I did not look at it directly. I need you to understand that. I turned my flashlight toward the movement and I saw, in my peripheral vision, in that space between looking and knowing, a shape moving between the stones. It was upright. It was slow. It moved the way a person moves when they have remembered how to walk but have not yet remembered why. It passed behind a large granite marker with a weeping angel on top, and it did not emerge from the other side. I did not go to look. I stood in the drizzle and the dark with my flashlight on the weeping angel for 4 minutes by my watch. Nothing moved. The cemetery was still and quiet, and the breathing that had been coming from the collapsed grave, had stopped. It had stopped because it was no longer coming from the grave. I became aware of it gradually, the way you become aware of something that has been happening for longer than you realize. A soft, rhythmic sound. Below me. Not in any particular direction. Everywhere below me, the way the sound of your own heartbeat is everywhere inside you. Slow. Patient. Rising and falling. I moved my flashlight in a slow arc around the path I was standing on. I was in the middle section of the cemetery, a row of modest gray headstones on either side, names and dates of people who'd been dead for 40, 60, 80 years. I played the beam left and right and then something caught it, a stone to my right, no more than 6 feet from where I was standing, that I had never noticed before. The stone was new. The granite was clean and dark, unweathered, still sharp at the edges the way fresh-cut stone is. It was a simple rectangular marker, modest in size, nothing carved on it but a name and 2 dates. I read my own name on that stone. Dale Edward Pruitt. Born March 7, 1981. And a death date, not a past date, not a date from weeks or months ago. Tonight's date. October 22, 2024. And the ground beneath my feet, the ground I was standing on, right there, that patch of earth 6 feet long and 6 feet deep, it was breathing. Not metaphorically. Not psychologically. Not in the way poets mean when they say the earth breathes. I mean the sod beneath my boots was rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm. I mean I could feel it through the soles of my shoes. I mean the earth beneath me had a pulse, and that pulse was patient, and it had been waiting, and it was not waiting anymore. I ran. I don't remember running, but I must have, because I was at the gate and then I was in the Silverado and the engine was turning and the headlights were flooding the cemetery road in white light and I was reversing, fast, gravel chattering against the undercarriage, until I hit the county road and swung the truck around and drove. I drove for 20 minutes before I pulled onto a lit-up gas station lot and put the truck in park and sat there shaking until a kid in a hoodie knocked on my window to ask if I was all right. I told him I was fine. I was not fine. I have not been fine. I called Raymond Phipps at 6 in the morning. I told him there'd been a grave collapse in the West Quarter and that I needed someone out there. He asked if I'd filed an incident report. I said I hadn't. He asked why not. I said I'd had to leave. He asked why. I told him I would explain later. I called the Harlan County Sheriff's Department and reported an open grave. The dispatcher, a woman named Carla who I've spoken to maybe 24 times over the years, asked me to say that again. I said it again. She said a deputy would go out and have a look. The deputy who went out was named Foster. Young guy, maybe 26, had the look of someone who'd chosen law enforcement in Harlan County because he figured it would be quiet. He called me at 8:15 a.m. from the cemetery. He said he'd found the collapsed section I'd described. He said the vault was cracked and the coffin lid was open. He said there was no body. His voice was doing something it was trying not to do. I asked him what the name on the stone near the path was. The new one. The clean granite one. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Pruitt, there's no new stone over here." I don't know what you saw last night, but there is no stone with your name on it." I thanked him and hung up. I drove to the cemetery. I walked in the gate in the clear morning light, 10:15 a.m., sun cutting flat October shadows across the markers. I walked to the middle section. I found the row of gray headstones where I'd been standing. I walked along the row looking at the names and dates. There was no new stone. No clean granite, no sharp edges, no date reading October 22, 2024. Just the old gray markers, mossy at the bases, names worn by weather to near illegibility. I stood there for a long time. I stood there until the cold worked through my jacket and my hands started to ache. Then I walked back to where Cole's collapsed plot was. The deputy had strung some emergency tape around it. The coffin was visible through the fractured vault, still open, still empty, the satin interior pale as old snow in the morning light. I looked at the temporary marker at the head of the plot. The laminated card in its plastic sleeve. The name on the card now read Thomas Dale Cole. My middle name. My first name as a middle name. On the grave of a dead man who had been cycling through names for 8 days like a radio cycling through frequencies. Like something tuning in. I have not gone back to work at Coldwater Creek Cemetery. Raymond Phipps has left me 3 voicemails. I have not returned them. The county eventually brought in another company to handle the situation with Cole's remains, officially classified as a vault failure, a manufacturing defect. The body transferred to the county medical examiner pending review. What the ME found or didn't find, I don't know. I haven't asked. I am writing this down because I believe, I know with a certainty that has nothing to do with proof, that what happened at that cemetery was not finished. I believe something came out of that box and it has been looking for a particular kind of space to fill. A specific shape. 6 feet long. 6 feet deep. Waiting for the right name to be put on the stone above it. I sleep with the lights on now. Every light in the single wide on all night. I sleep lightly and briefly and I check my hands every time I wake up, checking for dirt. So far clean. So far. But last night, I need to tell you this because I need somebody to know. Last night I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of breathing. Coming through the floor. Slow. Patient. Regular as a clock. Rising and falling. Rising and falling. Just beneath me. Waiting. We left the cemetery at 2 a.m. We were laughing, genuinely laughing, the way you do when fear breaks and becomes relief. Marcus had tripped over a headstone and gone face first into wet grass. Priya was still crying from how hard she'd laughed. I had my arm around Danny's shoulders and I could feel her shaking, half cold, half hysterical. We didn't know then that something had followed us home. We didn't know it had, in fact, already been waiting. The town of Harlow Creek has a population of roughly 2,300, depending on who you count and how recently. It sits in a fold of the West Virginia hills where cell service is mostly a rumor and the internet arrives by radio wave, slow and reluctant. The main street has a diner, a hardware store, a pharmacy, and a church so old the foundation stones are worn smooth as skin. There's a dollar store where the dollar store used to be and an empty building where the movie theater used to be, and past that, the road curls up the hill and becomes gravel and then becomes a path and then becomes the low iron fence of Harlow Creek Municipal Cemetery, established 1842. We'd been daring each other for 2 weeks. That's how long it took to get everyone committed. There were 4 of us. Me, my name is Joel Hartley and I want that on record before everything else. Marcus Webb, Priya Nair, and Danny Foss. We were 17. We were bored. It was the last August before senior year, which felt like the last real summer of our lives, and we were determined to fill it with something worth remembering. It was Marcus who'd first said it. Midnight. The cemetery. All 4 of us. No chickening. He'd said it the way Marcus said everything, like it was already decided, like the discussion was a formality. Marcus was like that. You forgave him because he was funny and because he was usually right that you'd end up doing the thing anyway. Priya had agreed immediately, which surprised me because Priya was the practical one. She was pre-med before pre-med was even a thing you could be in high school. She had spreadsheets for her homework calendar. She was not, in any obvious sense, the kind of person who snuck into cemeteries at night. But she'd said yes without hesitation, and when I'd raised my eyebrows at her later, she'd just shrugged. I'm not scared of dead people, she'd said. Dead people are just chemistry. Danny had said yes because I'd said yes, and I'd said yes because I was 17 and in love with Danny Foss and genuinely incapable of saying no to anything she might witness me doing. So, the cemetery. August 14th. We climbed the fence at 11:45 p.m. It was beautiful in a way I hadn't expected. The moon was almost full and the fog hadn't come in yet, and the headstones cast long blue shadows across the grass. Old oaks stretched overhead. Some of the graves went back to the 1800s, names worn almost completely smooth, dates barely legible. Beloved wife, gone too soon. In God's mercy. Priya walked beside me with her phone flashlight off, her head tilted back, looking at the stars between the branches. It's actually really peaceful, she said quietly, and I agreed, and I remember thinking that was an unusual thing to feel, and I remember wishing I could hold on to it. That specific calm. The sense that death was just a natural border between states of being, nothing to fear. I held on to that feeling for exactly 11 more minutes. Marcus had wandered ahead. He had his phone out and was narrating a mock ghost hunting video in a loud whisper. And here we see a very old dead person. Truly terrifying. I'm sensing a presence, Danny. I'm sensing that someone was definitely buried here. He stopped. Not gradually. Abruptly. Mid-sentence. We were maybe 40 feet from him. Far enough that I couldn't read his face in the dark, but close enough to see the shape of him change. The way he turned slightly, the way his phone went down to his side. Marcus. Danny said. He held up a hand. Wait. We waited. The wind moved through the oak leaves. Somewhere far off, a dog was barking. Then I heard it too. Someone was calling Marcus's name. I want to be precise about this because I've replayed it hundreds of times. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a whisper. It was a voice at a completely normal conversational volume, the way you'd call someone from the next room. Marcus. Just that. His name. Clear as anything, coming from somewhere behind the tree line at the far end of the cemetery, where the older graves were, the ones from the 1800s, the ones with no flowers, the ones that hadn't been visited in decades. Priya had grabbed my arm. Her fingers were tight enough to leave marks. Marcus turned around. He was very still. And then, in a voice I'd never heard from him before, flat and strange, all the performance gone out of it, he said, "That's my grandmother." A long silence. "Marcus," I said carefully, "your grandmother is." "I know," he said. "She died in March." The voice came again. "Marcus, honey." That exact cadence. That exact warmth. The way a grandmother says honey, like you're still 5 years old and you always will be. I didn't know Marcus's grandmother. I'd never heard her voice. But I believed him. I believed it completely and immediately, in the way you believe things that the animal part of your brain processes before your rational mind can object. "We need to leave," Priya said. Nobody argued. We moved fast, not quite running, the way you move when you're trying not to admit you're terrified. Marcus came with us without protest, without looking back, which was somehow the most frightening thing of all, because Marcus looked back at everything, because Marcus was the one who always made you feel stupid for being afraid, and he did not look back once. We were over the fence in 40 seconds. We were in Marcus's car in 2 minutes. He drove without speaking, and we were halfway home before Priya made a sound. "Joel," she said quietly. I had my voice memos app running. I do that sometimes, ambient sound for studying. It was running the whole time. Nobody had heard it in real time except Marcus. The recording caught it both times, clean and clear, with no distortion, no interference. Just a woman's voice saying her grandson's name out of the ground of Harlow Creek Municipal Cemetery at midnight on August 14th. We didn't sleep that night. None of us. I want to be honest, we spent the next 3 days telling ourselves it was explainable. Sound travels strangely in enclosed spaces. Fog distorts acoustics, though there'd been no fog. Someone must have been in the cemetery, a caretaker, a grieving family member, a drunk wandering through. The recording was a glitch. Priya, who needed it most, constructed the most elaborate rational framework. She researched infrasound, she looked up audio hallucinations, she sent Marcus 3 articles about grief-induced auditory phenomena. Marcus read none of them. On the second night after the cemetery, he texted us at 3 a.m. Something outside my window. Then a photo, just dark glass, just the reflection of his room. Nothing. Then footsteps. In the hall. Parents asleep, I checked. I lay in my own bed reading his texts and told myself it was anxiety, suggestion, the power of what we'd heard working on a susceptible mind. I told myself this until I heard it, the sound from my own hallway, the specific slow heavy tread of someone walking, someone big, someone who paused outside my door for a full 7 seconds before continuing down the hall. I checked. The hall was empty. My parents' door was closed. The carpet in front of my room had a faint damp impression. Not quite a footprint, not quite not a footprint. Just a compression in the fibers, as though something had stood there. I pressed my fingers to it and felt the cold. I didn't sleep again that night. On the third morning, Danny called me. She was speaking quietly, quickly. "There's dirt on my floor," she said, "in front of my window. And the window was locked from inside. Joel, I checked, it was locked." Pause. "It's not just dirt. It's dark and wet. The kind from a garden. Or from..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I drove to her house. The dirt was real. A small trail of it, from the window to the foot of her bed, as though something had climbed in, stood beside her while she slept, and then climbed back out. The window had been relocked from inside. There was no explanation for that. There was no explanation for any of it, but that detail, the lock, is the one that took up permanent residence in the back of my throat, the one that even now I can't think about without my hands going cold. Priya found scratches on her window that evening. Not on the glass, on the frame, the wood, the painted exterior edge. Long parallel marks at a height that required standing on the ledge 3 floors up. The call started on the 5th day. Priya's first. No caller ID. Early morning. She almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was her uncle Rajesh, who had died in a car accident the previous winter. She recognized him instantly, not because she was expecting it, but because you always know someone's voice, the specific timbre and rhythm of it, the way they say your name. He said her name and she said his name back, and then she said, "Uncle Raj, you're dead," and the line went quiet, and then he said, "Come back." She hung up. She called me immediately, already crying. I told her not to answer any more unknown numbers. She said, I know, and then she said, "But Joel, it sounded exactly like him." Exactly. Not like a recording. He was there. Marcus's call came that afternoon. His grandmother again. The same voice, the same warmth, the same impossible intimate knowledge of his name. "Marcus, honey, come back now. It's time to come back." He stayed on the line for almost a minute, he told me afterward. Not because he believed it was really her. Because he couldn't hang up. Because part of him, the part that had stood in that cemetery and heard her voice for the first time in 5 months, that part of him needed just another second of it. Danny's call was different. The voice was a boy's. She recognized it after a long moment as a childhood friend named Tommy Bright, who had drowned in the reservoir when they were both 9 years old. She hadn't thought about Tommy in years. The voice knew things only Tommy could know. A game they'd played, a secret they'd kept, a word between them that had never been spoken to anyone else. He said, "Danny, we want to see you. Come back to the place. We've been waiting." Then my call came. That night. 2:14 a.m. I answered it because I was awake and because I knew it was coming. We all knew by then, and because I'd been lying there for hours feeling the particular dread of waiting for something terrible you know is on its way. The voice was my brother's. My brother's name is Kevin. Kevin Hartley. He is buried in Harlow Creek Municipal Cemetery, Plot 4C, beneath a headstone that reads "Beloved Son and Brother." He has been buried there for 3 years. He was 22 when he died, and he was the best person I've ever known, and I have not been back to his grave since the day we put him in the ground because I cannot go there without becoming a version of myself I don't recognize. He said, "Hey little bro." And I said, "Kevin." And he said, "You need to come back. We all do. It's not done yet, Joel. Come back to where you left us. I want to tell you I hung up. I want to tell you I was rational and grounded and that I recognized it as whatever it was. A trick, a machine, an evil thing imitating something precious and using it against me. But I held that phone to my ear for 6 minutes and 14 seconds, and I talked to the voice that sounded like my dead brother, and I cried in a way I hadn't since the funeral, and when it finally said, "Come back, Joel, come soon," and the line went dead, I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark and thought, I'm going to go. I didn't know then that someone already had. He went back alone. He didn't tell any of us. He texted at 11 p.m. saying he was going to bed early, which none of us questioned because Marcus texted us every night saying something normal sounding and we were all doing the same thing, performing normalcy for each other while privately unraveling. He climbed the fence at 11:40 p.m. We know this because of the security camera the city had installed on the utility pole at the cemetery entrance. A recent addition funded by a vandalism complaint the previous spring. The footage was retrieved 2 days later. It shows Marcus climbing the fence cleanly, efficiently, like he'd done it a dozen times. It shows him walking into the cemetery on a straight line, heading toward the back section, toward the old graves. His posture is relaxed. He doesn't look like someone afraid. He looks like someone walking somewhere familiar, somewhere expected. At the 12-minute mark, he stops. He stops walking and he stands completely still for a full 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The timestamp runs. The trees move in the wind. Nothing else moves. Then he turns. Not toward the fence, not toward the exit. He turns to face something to his left, something between two of the old oaks, something the camera angle cannot show. and he takes 3 steps toward it, and then he is gone. Not off screen. Not behind a tree. The footage continues for another 4 hours and 40 minutes, until the battery dies at dawn. Marcus does not come back into frame. Marcus does not come back out the gate. Marcus Webb, who had climbed that fence laughing 10 days before, simply is not there anymore. His parents reported him missing on the second morning. The police searched the cemetery. They found nothing. No sign of struggle. No sign of departure. Just the grass and the trees and the stones and the quiet. And at the base of one of the old oaks, a small pile of dark wet dirt. It was Danny who found the records. She'd started digging, she used that word without thinking and then laughed a horrible laugh, into the cemetery's history. She pulled old issues of the Harlow Creek Gazette from the county library's microfiche archive. She went back and back and back. The earliest incident she found was from 1887. A young man named Thomas Cook had accompanied his mother to the cemetery for his father's burial. He'd come back alone 3 nights later, telling neighbors he'd heard his father calling him. He'd walked into the cemetery at 10 p.m. and not come out. He was found the next morning sitting at his father's grave, unable to speak, staring at the middle distance with the expression. The reporter had noted this in 1887, with no idea how precisely he was describing something, of a person listening to a sound no one else could hear. He never spoke again. He died the following spring in what the newspaper called a decline of unknown cause. Archive, Harlow Creek Gazette, various dates. 1887, Thomas Cook, age 19, found at father's grave. Unable to speak. Died within the year. 1931, Eleanor Marsh, age 34, reported hearing her mother's voice 3 nights after burial. Returned alone. Found the following dawn at the fence, disoriented, with dirt on her hands and face and in her mouth. Recovered physically. Moved away. 1956, 4 children ages 11 to 14, dared each other to enter cemetery after dark. All 4 heard family members' voices. 1, a boy named Robert Fenn, returned alone and was found 2 days later in the section dating to 1890, seated against a marker, alive but uncommunicative. He recovered but refused to discuss the event for the rest of his life, which ended in 2019. 1978, a groundskeeper named Earl Pratt reported persistent voices calling him from the older section of the grounds. He was discovered to have been returning after hours to listen. He resigned his position. The cemetery board voted to restrict access after dusk. This policy was rescinded in 1985 following budget cuts. Pattern noted by County Archivist, 1983. The calls are reported most often by those who have recently visited the cemetery and who have lost someone buried within it. They always describe the voice as unmistakably the voice of the deceased. The call is always for them to come back. It didn't start with anyone's burial. It didn't start when something was disturbed. The record suggested it had always been there, something in the ground, something in the specific hollow of those hills, something that had learned over the decades how to use the dead. How to speak in their voices. How to reach through the ground and through the phone lines and through every possible medium of human grief and pull at the living, draw them back, until they cross the fence again. The archivist's note from 1983 had a second line that Danny nearly missed, handwritten in the margin in different ink, added later. Once it calls you, it does not stop. The calling does not end until you return. Below that, in a different hand again, more recent, or until you do. We decided on the 3rd night after Marcus disappeared. There was no dramatic conversation. We just looked at each other in Danny's kitchen with the overhead light on and the blinds closed, and the 3 of us knew simultaneously that we were going. Not because we were brave. Not because we had a plan. We were going because Marcus was in there somewhere, because whatever had taken him had spoken to all of us in voices we loved, and because staying away was no longer an option the thing in the cemetery was going to allow us. We brought flashlights and Priya's phone set to record. We brought nothing else useful because there was nothing else useful to bring. Danny held my hand as we climbed the fence. The cemetery at night was not peaceful this time. That quality it had had, that blue stillness, was gone. The air felt wrong, pressurized, close, like being indoors in a very small room. The grass under our feet seemed soft in a way grass shouldn't be, yielding in a way that made me think about what was below it. The old oak trees looked different in the dark. They looked too large. Their roots pushed up through the ground in long pale ridges, and I tried not to look at them. We headed for the back section, where the old graves were, where Marcus had walked. We had been in the cemetery for 4 minutes when Priya grabbed my arm and turned her flashlight down. The graves were open. Not all of them. Not the new section, not the ones with fresh flowers and photograph holders and all the evidence of recent loss. But in the old section, the 1800s, the worn names, the forgotten ones, several of the plots had been disturbed. Not exhumed. Not dug out in any recognizable way. More as though the earth had simply parted. Long dark openings in the ground, rectangular and precise, perfectly aligned with the headstones above them. And from these openings, nothing. No sounds, no movement. Just dark. Just the smell of wet soil and something older beneath it. "Marcus," Danny called. She kept her voice steady. "I don't know how." Silence. "Marcus, we're here. We came back. You can come back now." A sound from our right. Between two oaks. Movement. And then Marcus was there. Standing at the edge of the flashlight's reach, maybe 20 feet away, looking at us. He was fine. That was the first thing. He looked fine. Clean clothes, standing upright, same haircut, same face. And he smiled when he saw us. A full, genuine smile, and he said, "Oh, thank God. I was so worried." Danny moved toward him immediately. I caught her arm. Something was wrong. I couldn't immediately name it. He looked like Marcus. He sounded like Marcus. The smile was right. The relief in his voice was right. But there was something in the quality of his stillness, the way he was standing, perfectly centered, no fidgeting, no natural shifting of weight, that was profoundly unlike Marcus, who was the most physically restless person I'd ever met, who could not stand still for 10 consecutive seconds in his 17 years of life. "Marcus," I said, "what happened to you?" "I got lost," he said simply. "I'm so glad you're here. We should all go. Together." He took a step toward us. "Marcus," Priya said carefully, "what's your mother's name?" The smile stayed exactly the same. That was the thing. It didn't flicker, didn't shift, didn't do any of the small recalibrations a human face makes when processing an unexpected question. It simply stayed. "Denise," he said. "Correct. Let's go home." He took another step. His feet, I noticed, made no sound on the grass. "What did you call me when we were 12? Priya said. "When I beat you at Mario Kart for the first time?" The thing wearing Marcus's face paused for 1/2 second. 1/2 second of recalculation. Then it said, with Marcus's exact inflection, his exact aggrieved tone, "I called you a cheater. You always cheated. Can we please go home now?" Priya looked at me. I looked at Priya. Danny beside me had gone very still. "That's not right," Priya said quietly. "He never called me a cheater. He called me a menace. He always called me that. Classic menace behavior. He said it every time." The thing looked at us. For one long moment, the smile remained. Then it changed. Subtly, incrementally, the way a dial turns, the warmth draining, the mimicry slipping, something else showing through underneath. Something very old and very patient and entirely without interest in what we needed it to be. "He's still here," it said in a voice that was no longer quite Marcus's. "If you want him, he's still here. You only have to stay." From somewhere beyond the tree line, from the direction of the old graves, the open ground, came a voice. Marcus's actual voice. Not the flat, careful mimicry in front of us. His voice, ragged and frightened and completely real, crying out, "Don't stay. Get out. It takes you if you stay, it keeps you, get out." Then silence. Then the thing that looked like Marcus smiled with all of Marcus's teeth and said very gently, "There's no hurry. It's peaceful here. Everyone is here, eventually." We ran. That's the whole of it. We ran and we didn't look back, which is the only piece of advice I have for anyone who finds themselves in a situation like this. Do not look back, because whatever is behind you knows your name now, knows every voice you've ever loved, and it will use all of them at once if it has to. I don't know what happened in those few seconds. I don't know if Priya got something from Marcus's real voice, some indication of where he was, some clue. I think she did. I think she made a decision in the instant before we ran, because she paused, just a half step, just long enough to shine her flashlight toward the old oaks, toward the open ground. I heard her make a sound I've never heard from Priya before or since. Not a scream. Something smaller. The sound of seeing something that doesn't fit in the brain. Then she ran too. And Marcus, the real Marcus, I believe he was the real one. I have to believe that Marcus was somehow with us, stumbling out of the dark at the fence line, grabbing the iron bar, hauling himself over. He had dirt on his hands and his clothes and in his hair, and he was shaking so hard he could barely hold the fence. He couldn't speak for 20 minutes after we got to the car. He still won't tell us what he saw in those 2 days. He won't tell us what it felt like to be there, in that place, in whatever state the cemetery kept him in. He said once, in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely, as though the words escaped before he could stop them, "It's not cruel. That's the worst thing. It doesn't feel like something cruel. It just feels like being waited for. He didn't finish the thought. He hasn't brought it up again. We don't ask. We don't talk about it much now. That's the honest answer to the question I imagine you asking. We came out and we went home and we went back to school and senior year happened and then college applications and then life. Marcus is studying architecture in Pittsburgh. Priya is pre-med at Johns Hopkins, which surprised no one. Danny and I lasted 2 more years before something quiet ended between us, the way quiet things end, and we are still friends, which is better than most outcomes. None of us go back to Harlow Creek. None of us have received a call from an unknown number since that night. The footsteps stopped. The dirt on the floor stopped. The scratches on the windows, though Priya's were never fully explained and still aren't, those stopped too. Whatever had followed us home seemed to retreat when we returned, as though the act of going back had satisfied some old requirement, some condition of release. I say seemed to retreat because I want to be precise. I'm not certain it retreated. I'm not certain it didn't simply, recede to a distance that no longer required active demonstration. Something patient, the archivist had written. Patient enough to wait a century between incidents. Patient enough to know that the living always come back to their dead, eventually, through grief, through memory, through guilt, through love. Patient enough to know that all it has to do is speak in the right voice at the right moment, and the door opens. I think about the open graves. Not constantly, not the way I did in the months after, but regularly. In the way you think about something that has reshaped your understanding of what is possible. I think about the voice that said it's peaceful here, and I think about how it said that in Marcus's voice, using Marcus's inflection, and I think about how for 1/2 second, less than a half second, some part of me had believed it, had felt the pull of it, had thought, everyone ends up here eventually and Kevin is already here, and maybe, that's the part one don't examine too closely. That half second. That pull. That's the part one suspect the thing in the cemetery was counting on. It's been 3 years. I'm 20 now. I am in the process of becoming a person the way you are at 20, still figuring out the shape of who you're going to be. I don't think about Harlow Creek every day. Some weeks I barely think about it at all. The cemetery is 170 miles from where I live now. I'm not going back. Except that last night I was walking to my car after class. The long way, the shortcut through the far parking lot, empty at that hour, and the streetlight was doing something strange with the shadows, and the air smelled like wet soil the way it does sometimes in autumn, and I heard it. Behind me. Clear and close and unmistakable. My own voice. Calling my own name. I kept walking. I did not look back. But it was my voice. My exact voice, the way I hear it on recordings, the timbre and pitch of it, not the way I think I sound but the way I actually sound. And it said my name the way I would say it, the exact rhythm, the specific shape of the vowels, the way the J catches slightly at the start. I kept walking. I'm writing this down because I think I should write it down. Because Priya, when I called her an hour later, answered on the first ring, which she never does. Because she said before I spoke a word, "It happened to you too, didn't it?" Not a question. I don't know what it means that it's using my own voice now. I don't know if that's progress, by the thing's logic, whatever logic it has, or if it means something has changed, some new stage of whatever process we set in motion the night we climbed that fence for a dare, for boredom, for the feeling of being 17 and alive and wanting something worth remembering. I remember it. I remember all of it. I kept walking last night. I keep telling myself I'll keep walking. I keep telling myself the distance is what saves you. Stay far enough away, don't go back, and eventually something that patient will find a shorter road to somewhere else. I keep telling myself that. When they left the cemetery at 2 a.m., something followed them home. 3 years later it was still calling. And now it had learned to sound exactly like him. I wasn't supposed to hear the audio because those cameras don't record sound. That's the first thing I told myself when I sat down at the monitor station at exactly 3:17 in the morning and heard breathing coming from the speakers that, according to every technical specification and every conversation I'd ever had with the facilities manager, were not connected to anything. The screen for camera 7, the one covering the eastern quadrant, the older section of Harefield Memorial where the stones go back to the early 1900s and the ground is so soft after rain that your boots sink 2 inches with every step, had begun flickering at the timestamp, the white digits in the bottom right corner stuttering like a candle in wind, and between those flickers I saw it. A figure standing absolutely motionless between the grave of Margaret Eloise Dunbar, 1887 to 1931, and the crumbling obelisk belonging to the Kettridge family plot. It was standing with its back to the camera, or what I assumed was its back, because the shape of it wasn't entirely legible in the gray-green glow of the night vision feed. What I mean is that it was difficult to determine which direction it was facing. And then I heard the breathing, slow, deliberate, like someone trying very hard to control it, coming through the speakers that were not supposed to produce any sound at all. I reached forward and turned the volume knob down to 0. The breathing continued at the exact same volume. The breathing wasn't mine and I was alone. Let me back up, because if you're reading this, and I have to assume someone eventually will, you need to understand what kind of place Harrowfield was before I start describing what it became in my mind during those 11 months. The cemetery sits on about 42 acres in the rural outskirts of Clement County, maybe 20 minutes east of the interstate if you take the county road, and at night the only reminder that the rest of the world exists is a low amber glow on the western horizon from the truck stop on Route 9 and the occasional sound of an 18-wheeler downshifting on the overpass. During the day, it's a reasonably unremarkable place. Maintained hedgerows, gravel paths, a small chapel that nobody used except for the occasional graveside service on weekday mornings when I was long gone and asleep. But at night, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., it was mine. Mine and the dead's, which is a thing you say as a dark joke when you're training for a job like that, until the night comes when it stops feeling like a joke and starts feeling like a description. My routine was the same every shift without variation, and I want you to understand this because the variations, when they finally came, were more disturbing for their contrast with what I'd established as normal. I arrived at 10:50, parked my truck in the small lot behind the maintenance shed, and walked to the security office, a converted groundskeeper's room at the back of the chapel building, carrying a thermos of coffee and whatever I'd packed to eat. The office itself was maybe 12 feet by 14, with a folding table along one wall holding the monitor array, a logbook, a two-way radio that only ever reached the off-site answering service, and a small space heater that smelled like burning dust every time it cycled on. I would go through the standard handoff checklist, check all gate locks, verify the perimeter floodlights on the north and south fences, walk a brief circuit of the main path through the central section. And then I would settle into the chair in front of the monitors, and I would not leave that chair for the next 7 hours except to refill my thermos or use the bathroom at the end of the hall. I became very good at staying still. I became very good at watching screens that showed nothing, because nothing is what they showed on most nights, and I found a particular kind of comfort in that, in the reliable emptiness of the cemetery grounds spread across 8 camera feeds, the stones standing in their rows like sentences in a language I'd learned to read without understanding. The monitors were older units, the kind with a slight curvature to the glass and a faint horizontal roll to the image if the temperature in the room dropped low enough. Camera 1 covered the front gate and the main entrance road. Camera 2 handled the chapel exterior and parking area. Cameras 3 and 4 swept the central sections, the newer burial grounds where the stones were uniform and white and the ground was well drained and level. Cameras 5 and 6 were pointed at the maintenance areas and the tool shed. Camera 7 was the eastern quadrant, the old section, and Camera 8 covered the far northern boundary near the tree line, where the cemetery edged up against a narrow band of second-growth woods. Camera 8 was the one I liked least from the very beginning, not for any reason I could articulate, but because the tree line at the edge of its frame moved in a way that was not always consistent with the movement of the trees themselves, if that makes sense. Or rather, it made no sense at all, which is why I trained myself not to think about it and why I developed a habit of glancing at Camera 8 last, after I'd already confirmed that the other 7 screens were clear. This was not a rational system. It was a coping mechanism, and I want to be honest about that because I think honesty is the only thing I have left to offer. The first anomaly, and I use that word deliberately because it took me a long time before I was willing to use any other, occurred in the 3rd week of October, roughly 4 months into my employment. I had been on shift for a little over 2 hours, the coffee was still hot, and I was updating the incident log with the notation I wrote every night. No activity. Ground secure. All gates confirmed locked at 23:15. I heard a sound from outside the office window that I initially interpreted as an animal, a raccoon or a possum investigating the trash bins behind the maintenance shed, which happened with some regularity, and when I turned back to the monitors, there was a figure standing in the eastern quadrant on Camera 7. This was not remarkable in itself. Trespassers were uncommon but not unheard of, and my protocol was to attempt radio contact with the answering service, grab the flashlight, and do a visual sweep of the area in question. What made me hesitate, what kept me seated for almost 90 seconds before I stood up, was the figure's absolute and total stillness. It was standing between the Dunbar Stone and the Kettridge Obelisk. I would learn the geography of that section of the cemetery intimately over the following months, and it was not moving at all. Not shifting weight. Not turning. Not even the subtle micromotion of a living body at rest. It was the stillness of an object, of something placed there. I did the sweep. I walked the eastern quadrant for 20 minutes with the heavy flashlight in my hand and the gravel crunching loud and deliberate under my boots, and I found nothing. No footprints in the soft ground, though it had rained 2 days before and I would have expected some trace. No disturbed vegetation, no gate tampering, nothing. I wrote it up as a possible visual artifact, lens distortion or reflected light from the highway, and returned to my chair. The figure on camera 7 was now standing approximately 15 feet closer to the camera than it had been when I left. I know how that sounds. I want to be precise, I did not see it move. I left with it in one position and I returned to it in another, and there was no footage gap, no timestamp discontinuity, no explanation in the recording for how it had traversed that distance. I watched the playback 4 times. Between one frame and the next, with no discernible transition, it was simply elsewhere. I turned the camera's brightness all the way down and then back up, told myself it was the lens, the angle, a trick of my own tired eyes, and I sat in that chair until 7 a.m. and I did not look at camera 7 again. I did not report it. I want to be clear about that, and I want to be honest about why. I needed the job. I was 8 months behind on my truck payment and I had a storage unit full of things that had been my mother's, and I could not afford to be the night shift guard who reported shadows in the cemetery as potential incidents requiring investigation. So I kept it in my own private log, a small notebook I kept in the inside breast pocket of my jacket, and I started paying closer attention to the timestamp on camera 7 specifically, because something about the nature of the disruption made me want to track it, the way you document symptoms, not because you want to know the diagnosis but because documentation is the only thing you can do that feels like control. What I found over the following 3 weeks was that the figure appeared exclusively at 3:17 a.m. Not 3:16, not 3:18 to 3:17 exactly, at which point the timestamp on camera 7 would begin its stuttering, that digital trembling like a second hand catching on a gear, and the figure would be there in the eastern quadrant, always starting from the same position near the tree line where the oldest graves backed against the fence, always facing, or seeming to face, in that ambiguous, directionless way of its, toward the camera. And each night it was closer than it had been the night before. Not dramatically. Not the kind of closer that a reasonable person could point to as definitive proof of movement. 6 inches perhaps. A foot. Enough that over the course of weeks the accumulation became undeniable, and it was standing now nearly at the center of the eastern quadrant's field of view, close enough that I could observe, or believed I could observe, details of its form that had not been visible when it first appeared at the tree line. It was wearing what appeared to be dark clothing, formal in cut, or perhaps that was the way the night vision rendered fabric that was actually the same gray-green color as everything else in that palette. It had no visible face in any frame I could isolate. This could have been a function of the camera's resolution, the angle, the quality of the image compression. I told myself it was. I told myself many things. The audio began in November. I want to describe this carefully because the order in which things happen matters, and because the audio was the thing that first made me feel that whatever this was, it was aware of me specifically, rather than simply present in a space I happened to occupy. I was sitting at the monitors on a night when the temperature had dropped sharply, and the space heater was running continuously, and the smell of burning dust was so constant that I'd stopped perceiving it, and I became aware that I could hear something beneath the mechanical hum of the heater and the distant automotive sounds from Route 9. It was layered, which is the only word I can use that approaches accuracy, not a single sound but several occupying the same frequency, braided together into something that my brain kept trying to parse as language without quite succeeding. I thought at first that it was radio bleed, some frequency crossing with another, and I turned off the two-way radio. The sound continued. I checked my phone. Nothing playing. I sat very still and I listened, and over the course of the next several minutes I began to pick out individual threads from the texture of it, the way you might begin to see individual figures in an abstract painting once your eye has adjusted to the scale. One word became distinguishable first: stay. Not commanded, not aggressive or imperative in tone, but offered almost gently, the way you might say it to someone who is about to leave a warm room on a cold night. Then, on a different night, a second word, lower in the register, requiring me to lean toward the speakers whose knobs were turned to 0 to hear it clearly. Don't leave. These two phrases repeated across several nights, alternating, weaving, sometimes overlapping so that the words tangled into each other and the meaning degraded. But the third thing I heard, the thing that made me push back from the monitor station so hard that my chair rolled into the filing cabinet behind me, the thing that made me stand in the middle of the small office with my flashlight in my hand as though a beam of light could be useful against something that was coming through the speakers of a camera system that did not record sound, was my name. My full name. Spoken with complete and careful accuracy, in a voice that was nearly right, nearly human, calibrated to something that sounded like recognition, like greeting, like the specific frequency of someone who has been waiting for a long time to finally say it aloud. I need to describe what I saw on camera 7 on the night of November 14th, because this is the point in the account where the record diverges most severely from anything I can explain in terms of equipment malfunction or personal distress, and because I have gone over the specifics of that night so many times in my own mind that I can render them with a precision that I cannot claim for earlier events. The ground was visible in the eastern quadrant. Camera 7's field of view took in perhaps 20 graves in the front row and the upper portions of the stones behind them, and I was watching as I had taken to watching, with the particular focused attention of someone who has stopped pretending that the screens are boring, when I noticed that the grave directly in the center of the frame, the plot belonging to one Robert C. Harlan, 1903 to 1958, whose stone was a low rectangular marker flush with the grass, appeared to be breathing. This is the word I wrote in my notebook at the time, and it is the word that remains most accurate. The ground above the grave was rising and falling in a rhythm that was measured and deliberate, each cycle lasting approximately 4 seconds. The earth lifting perhaps half an inch at maximum and then settling again with a kind of exhausted precision. The grass above it bent outward in a radial pattern on the rise, like the hair around a sleeping person's mouth. I watched it for 11 minutes without moving. I counted the cycles. 162 over 11 minutes, which averages to 1 every 4.1 seconds, which is within the normal range of resting human respiration. Then the rhythm changed. It quickened for approximately 30 seconds, becoming irregular and effortful, and then, and I am asking you to receive this without prejudgment, because I know how it reads on a page, a hand pressed upward from beneath the surface of the grave, not through the soil. The soil deformed around it, the grass separating in clean lines like seams in old fabric, and the hand came up from underneath with the slow, arrested patience of something that had been performing this movement for a very long time and was not uncertain about it. The fingers were extended. The palm was facing upward. It remained in that position for a count of 8, visible from the third knuckle up, and then it withdrew, and the ground settled back to its level surface, and within 10 seconds there was no visible disturbance in the grass and soil above Robert C. Harlan's grave except for the faint parallel lines where it had separated, which could, in the quality of night vision imagery, have been mistaken for shadows cast by the adjacent stone. I sat in my chair until 7 a.m. I filed an incident log that read, "No activity. Ground secure." And I drove home in the gray November light and sat in my truck in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 45 minutes before I felt capable of going inside. The paranoia arrived gradually, then all at once. I am borrowing that phrasing from somewhere, I know, but I cannot improve on its accuracy. The gradual phase lasted through most of November. Small dissonances, framing slightly off, sensations that I could dismiss individually even as their accumulation became harder to ignore. I began to hear breathing behind me in the security office. Not from the speakers, from the room itself, from the space directly behind my chair, the shallow zone between the back of my head and the wall. I would turn and find the room empty in the way that rooms are reliably empty, offering nothing but the filing cabinet and the coat hook and the 3 feet of concrete wall above the baseboard and the door at the end of the hall standing slightly ajar to the bathroom. Nothing. And I would turn back to the monitors and on camera 2, the camera that covered the chapel exterior and the parking area directly outside the security office's single window, I would see, standing at the edge of the camera's frame facing the building, the same figure from the eastern quadrant. Never for more than a few seconds. Never close enough to resolve into detail. But there, with a there-ness that was by then unmistakable, and then not there, and then me alone again in the room with the space heater and the coffee and the breathing I could not locate. The night that destroyed whatever remained of my framework for rational explanation was the night I noticed the discrepancy in camera 6. Camera 6 covered the maintenance area and had, by virtue of its angle, a partial view into the security office through the window, not intended, just a consequence of the camera's placement on the outer wall of the chapel building. I had never paid particular attention to this footage. On this night, near the end of November, I was reviewing earlier footage from the shift as part of a routine check when I reached the 2:43 a.m. timestamp on camera 6 and saw myself sitting in my chair in front of the monitors. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that I was currently standing. I had been standing for approximately 20 minutes, pacing the office, because I had been hearing the breathing more intensely than usual and sitting still had become intolerable. But on camera 6 at 2:43 a.m. I was seated. Not in a previous recording, the timestamp corresponded to a time that was currently 8 minutes in the past, which was within the normal playback buffer, and 8 minutes ago I had been standing, pacing, not seated, not in that chair. The figure on the screen was seated in my chair in front of the monitors. The posture was approximate. It was very close to mine, but not quite. The head angle was wrong by a few degrees, the shoulder line not quite right, as though whatever was occupying my chair in that footage had assembled its idea of how I sat from observation rather than from the inside. From watching rather than from being. And then I looked at the monitor showing the live feed from camera 6, the one displaying the current exterior of the chapel and the partial view of the office window. And in the live feed, in the current moment, there was something standing directly behind my chair. Standing close enough that if I had still been seated, it would have been close enough to touch the back of my head. Close enough that the geometry of the thing's position relative to the window and the camera angle suggested that its face, if it had a face in any stable sense, was positioned approximately 6 inches above where the back of my skull would have been. I was standing in the center of the room, and it was standing at my chair, and neither of us had moved. I reviewed the archive in early December. I want to be precise about what I mean by the archive. Herefield's camera system retained 90 days of continuous footage on a local server that lived in a locked cabinet beneath the monitor table, and I had never reviewed anything more than the previous night's recordings, because there had never been a reason to go further back. I went back to the beginning of the system's retention window, 90 days prior to that night, placing it in early September, a month before I started the job, and I searched the camera 7 footage for activity at 3:17 a.m. What I found was that the figure had been appearing at that time for the entirety of the archive. Every night. Always at 3:17. Always in the eastern quadrant. Always beginning near the tree line and always across the 90 days of footage, moving incrementally toward the camera in the same measured, invisible way. Meaning the figure had been present in that cemetery on camera 7 every night before I was employed there, and presumably for nights before the archive window began, accumulating distance. Approaching. Arriving. I want to describe what I observed in the archive footage of December 2nd specifically, because that was the night the graves opened, and the footage of it exists or existed, and I am describing it here because I do not know who else will and because I think someone should. At 3:17 a.m. on the camera 7 feed from December 2nd, the figure was standing in the eastern quadrant at what I estimated, based on known reference distances, to be approximately 40 feet from the camera, which put it somewhere in the middle rows of the old section, among the graves from the 1940s. The timestamp stuttered in its familiar way. And then, beginning with the grave in the leftmost column of the nearest row and moving outward in a pattern that was too deliberate to be coincidental, the dirt above each burial site began to shift. Not dramatically, not the cinematic upheaval of disturbed earth, but subtly, with the quality of something adjusting its position in a tight space, something redistributing weight, something pressing outward on a container that was not designed to be pressed from the inside. The grass above 6 graves in the front portion of camera 7's frame showed this movement over the course of approximately 4 minutes, and then, low to the ground, below the level of the headstones, moving through the grass in a way that was more liquid than ambulatory, more suggestion than solid presence. Shapes began to move through the frame. I counted 3 before the footage deteriorated into static for 37 seconds. 3 shapes, low and slow, moving in a broken, interrupted way that suggested a fundamental disarticulation of the components of movement, as though each body part were operating on a separate decision that had been coordinated imperfectly. They moved toward the figure standing in the middle distance. They gathered around it. And then the static cleared and they were gone, all of them, the figure and the shapes together, and camera 7 showed only the eastern quadrant in stillness, undisturbed, and the stones standing in their rows, and the sky beginning its infinitesimal lightening toward dawn. I have to describe the last night, and I am going to do it carefully, and I am going to do it completely, and then I am going to stop. It was a Thursday in the second week of December. The cold had settled into the county properly by then, the kind of cold that makes the air taste like metal and turns the gravel paths pale. I arrived at 10:50 as always. I did my perimeter check. I made my coffee. I sat down. All 8 monitors were active, all 8 feeds showing the cemetery in its familiar gray-green palette, and I opened my notebook to write the initial log entry, and I noticed that all 8 cameras showed something in their frame. Not the figure from camera 7, though it was there too. All 8 cameras simultaneously, including the cameras that covered the parking lot and the maintenance shed and the chapel exterior, each contained at least one presence in its frame and most contained several. I'm going to try to describe them accurately. They were standing with a posture that suggested the mechanism of standing had been recently and imperfectly learned. Weight distributed wrongly, knees at slight angles, heads tilted in a way that seemed less like looking and more like listening. Some were more visible than others. Some appeared only as a thickening of the darkness in one region of the frame, a density that the camera registered without resolving into form. Some were partial. A shoulder, a head from the crown to the jaw, a pair of hands hanging at specific angles that seemed to encode something I could not read. And all of them were still. All of them were demonstrating the specific quality of stillness that I had first encountered on camera 7 3 months before. Not the stillness of rest, not the stillness of patience, but the stillness of something that does not move because it has decided not to for now, and the decision is conscious and the now is finite. Camera 3, covering the central section, showed 7 figures standing in the main path between the rows. Camera 5, covering the maintenance area, showed 2 standing near the equipment shed with their backs to the camera. Camera 8, the northern boundary near the tree line, showed more than I could count clearly. They were standing in the gap between the cemetery's boundary fence and the first line of trees, and their stillness was absolute, and they were facing the camera and the camera was facing them, and the symmetry of it was the most frightening thing I had observed in 11 months. More frightening than the hand beneath the grass. More frightening than my name spoken by a voice without a throat to speak it. Because the symmetry implied audience, implied theater, implied that this had been assembled for viewing. That they had arranged themselves for me. I heard the footsteps outside the office door at 3:17. I need to be precise about what I mean, not the footsteps of someone walking, not the purposeful rhythm of a person moving from one place to another. These were arriving footsteps. The footsteps of something that had been moving for a long time toward a specific destination and was now very close to it. They were slow and they were heavy, and there was a quality to them that I cannot describe as wet in a meteorological sense, but only in the sense of something that has spent a long time in the ground, and the sound of them on the concrete path outside the door was not clean and percussive like shoe leather on stone, but muffled and soft and dragging, each step concluding with a sound like something being pulled free. I stood up from my chair. I crossed the room in 4 steps. I turned the bolt lock on the office door, which I had never turned in 11 months of employment because the lock was stiff from disuse and because there had never been a reason. The bolt turned with difficulty and then seated with a click that was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The breathing in the room was very loud now. It had been building for weeks and now it was close, directional, specific, coming from behind me from the chair I had just vacated, and I turned around and camera 6 showed, in the live feed, in the current moment, in the partial view of the office through the exterior window, the figure from the eastern quadrant standing in the security office behind my chair. Not approximated at a distance. Not suggested by thickness of shadow. Present. Here. In the room in which I was also present. Standing close enough to the back of the chair that it had to have been standing close enough to me that I should have felt it, in the cold air or the warmth of another body or whatever physics should have made itself known across that distance. I did not feel it, but the camera showed it. Standing with that particular posture. Imperfectly learned, slightly wrong, a translation of standing rather than standing itself. Directly behind the chair, directly behind the space I had occupied for the past 4 hours, looking at the monitors that were showing every camera at once, every screen filled with presence, as if it too were watching the footage, as if it had pulled up a chair. I pressed my back against the locked door. I did not take my eyes off camera 6. The figure on camera 6 did not move. The breathing was directly in front of me, which meant I was facing it, which meant it was between me and the monitors, which meant the camera's partial view of the office through the window was the only thing telling me where it was, because my own eyes were telling me the room was empty. I could not reconcile these things. I stood against the door and I listened to the breathing and I watched the figure in the camera 6 feed, and I became aware, with a slowness that was its own kind of mercy, that it was turning its head. Incrementally. With the quality of its movement being the same quality as its approach across the eastern quadrant. No observed transition, only a series of positions, each one further along a trajectory, each one closer to facing me directly through the camera, through the window, across the room. It was turning toward me. And in the final position I observed before the screens went to static, all 8 simultaneously, a complete failure of the system, a wall of gray noise. Its face was directly toward me, framed in the camera 6 window, and it was wearing an expression that I will not describe because I do not have words for it that feel accurate, only words that feel approximately wrong in ways I am unable to correct. The following is a transcription of the audio file recovered from the security office's backup recording buffer, designated HMCEC14, timestamp 3:22 through 3:31 a.m. The video component of this file is corrupted beyond recovery. The camera fell. The sound of it was the clatter of the monitor leaving the table edge and the brief scream of the power cable before it pulled free, and then the room was lit only by the remaining screens, and the remaining screens were static, and the static cast a light that was not steady. The breathing in the recording is audible throughout, 2 distinct registers, overlapping. one which analysis has confirmed matches the respiratory patterns captured in the guard's previous 9 minutes of footage, and one which does not match any human baseline in the comparative database. The second register is lower. It is slower. It does not change cadence regardless of what else is occurring in the audio. There is a wet sound that begins at the 3-minute 24 mark and continues for the remainder of the file's usable length. The sound of something being moved across a concrete floor that is not moving under its own motivation. There is a period of approximately 40 seconds during which a voice, not the guard's voice, not consistent with any voice print in the facility's records, but assembled from components that approximate human speech with a precision that is deeply, deliberately imprecise, speaks into the recording. It says the guard's name. It says stay. It says don't leave. And then it says, in a register that is slightly too low and an inflection that is slightly too flat, with the cadence of someone repeating something they have heard many times without understanding why it ends conversations. I'll see you tomorrow night. There are 12 seconds of silence. And then, once, close to the microphone, with a patience that sounds like it has never been tired. He's still here. Addendum, filed by Clement County Security Contracting Associates, December 19th. The guard assigned to Harrahfield Memorial Cemetery failed to respond to the 7 a.m. check-in call on December 14th. A welfare check dispatched at 7:42 a.m. found the security office locked from the inside. Responding officers noted that the monitoring equipment had been significantly damaged, consistent with a power surge or equipment failure. The guard was not located on the premises. An official inquiry attributed the monitoring system failure to an electrical fault in the chapel building's aging wiring, a finding consistent with the facility's maintenance records. The guard's employment file was closed as an unresolved absence. His truck was recovered from the facility parking lot 14 days later and impounded. All security footage from the Harrahfield Memorial System was deleted from the local server as part of the equipment replacement protocol that followed the incident. The replacement system was installed and is fully operational. One audio file from the backup buffer, designated HMCDC-14, was not included in the deletion protocol due to an administrative cataloging error. It remains on the county contracting server. No one has submitted a request to access it. No one has submitted a request to delete it either. It is still there.